Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the first Civil Beat Ideas live show of 2021. We're so glad to have you with us here on Facebook, and we want to encourage all of you to share any comments that you might have, any questions that you might have. We do these shows live so that you can participate in them, and so we hope that you'll feel free to join in. I want to say how very happy I am to start the year with two really wonderful people who have written two very beautiful and thoughtful pieces for us in December. We have Manulani Aluli Meyer and Jonathan Scheuer. And Manu's piece was entitled 7 Principles to Transform Housing in Hawaii, subtitled Place Aloha Aina Where It Belongs, at the Center, and Follow the Principles That Surround It. And we ran Jonathan's piece, How to Redefine the Housing Crisis in Hawaii, Myths, Truths, and Steps That Can Take Us Forward. And Jonathan's piece ran on December 13th, Manu's piece ran on December 14th, so they were back to back. And you can find both of them on our website. But we're here to use those essays as a point of departure for a conversation on housing, really looking at the way forward and looking at the real connection between the two pieces, even though Manu and Jonathan created their pieces independently of each other, hadn't read each other's pieces before they ran, there's really a tremendous connection between the two of them. So Manu, can we start with you and maybe talk about the 7 principles that you outlined in your essay, and then we'll come to Jonathan and you can talk about the pieces in your essay, and then we'll talk about how they're all connected.
Easy breezy. Aloha my gang. So nice to share this time with you, Julia and Jonathan. Thank you for having me and my ohana. I'd like to start today with our home song from our home on Kailua Beach, written by and composed by Auntie Irmgard Aluli. Our home was called Ho'omaikai. Ho'onani, Ho'omaikai. I ka haku mana mau no na pua like ole me na manu leo home ho'omaikai ho'omaikai ho'omaikai. And that is thank you for letting me sing that, gang, because that opens up the 7 principles, because my family went there this past Sunday to talk about our father who just passed at 92 years old, and he really helped secure that home for us in the 1960s, and we lived there till the 80s. And I gotta tell you, when you live on a place like Kailua, right there on the beach, the beauty that is infused by the color blue, the energy of our communities that knew each other, loved each other, walking to the school, you begin to understand the beauty and the significance of what living in Hawaii really means. But living in a Hawaiian family, my ohana's, my mama is Emma Aluli. We are dedicated to this idea of aloha aina. And so when pressed to ask what is at the core of indigenous sensibilities, Hawaiian enduring principles, Hawaiian philosophies, for me to simplify it in my work as a professor is to simply say aloha aina. Okay? And aloha aina is the mirror image of aina aloha. It's our older way that we saw the land. The land always loved us. Ku'u aina aloha is our older way. And so aloha aina had to be activated. That helped cousin Emma Aluli and the gang develop the Protect Ka Ho'olawe Ohana. And so we have to have the love of land at the center of our thinking. And so I'm dedicated to that, and my ohana has been for many lifetimes. So the 7 principles. Ready? Um, Ho'opono. Ho'opono is the ability to speak goodness, truth, and then to follow up with actions. And I gotta say, Jonathan, that really sounds like hold developers to their promises. So we've got so much to talk about. So I'm just gonna get through these really quick because you've got to know that in Jonathan's solution sets, they are actually drenched with principles of Nohona Hawaii. Another principle, Nohona Hawaii, is the idea and the reminding of people that this is not Kansas. We live in an island. This is Hawaii Nui Akea. We are island people. We are Moana people. We are different. And so Nohona Hawaii, one of the 7 principles is to recognize that we live in an island setting. And with that, we have distinct values and cultural mores. Another principle is Awamo Kuleana. Now this one, I love this one because it's changed my life. Awamo Kuleana, most people think it's just to carry your responsibility. But for me, the Noahuna for me, Awamo Kuleana is collective transformation through individual excellence. It's an energetic field about knowing who is in the room with you, knowing who in your ohana can help in certain ways. These are insights of principles of culture that bring a more mature understanding to how we can address this housing situation, which is simply a symptom to the systems that are diseased in our society. It's a symptom. Ike kupuna, the knowledge from my elders. Duh, duh. So Ike kupuna, so much to say about that, but where do we begin? When everything is just short term, short term, short term, short term. When you have the knowledge of elders walking in a room, everything changes. And you know what I'm talking about. Kauhale. Kauhale is the idea that, gosh, do we all live in a nuclear family setting? Oh, wait, no, we never have. So why do we, what's the issue here? Why do we pretend to keep a continuous insistence of cultural values that we do not have? So the Kauhale is a structure of allowing us to see living in different ways. Then there's Ike Aina. Oh, my favorite. Ikeaina is the ability to learn from land, not simply about land, as most of our structures of education and schooling predict. We learn from land, and from that learning comes a relationality that understands we need ulu everywhere, we need niu everywhere, we can plant uala everywhere. So why do we not have puakinikini everywhere? So that idea of Ike Aina, let us just that's number 6. Number 7, kokua aku kokua mai. Okay, this is the one, this is the deconstructing capitalism one. You know, the things that we can do with each other, and the things that we should allow each other to do and to help with. And so these are principles that come straight out of um, my heart and my family's heart because of what we're committed to. So thank you for allowing this little introduction, because the way, this is with Jonathan's words, the way we define a problem determines the way we find its solutions. And so I want to say, Jonathan, that one sentence, okay, everybody, I'm going to say it again. This is how he ended. The way we define a problem determines the way we find its solutions. So redefining what the problem is helps us live into the solution set, and that is kukulu kumuhana. But it's not one of the 7 things. It's infused in there. So thanks for letting me talk about that, Julia.
Mahalo,
Can't wait to talk further. Yay.
yeah, mahalo. That was a perfect introduction. And so from here, let's go to Jonathan. And Jonathan, if you want to, maybe we can share with people that you've been on the Land Use Commission for a number of years, and maybe explain to people a little bit about what the Land Use Commission is, what it does. And then from there, so people have a kind of an understanding of the context within which you wrote your piece, tell us your thoughts that were in the piece.
Aloha. Thanks, Julia, and thank you, Manu, for the opportunity to share space with you. I'm coming today from Manoa, where I was born and raised. And like Julia said, I sit on the State Land Use Commission, which some people don't know of, but is actually a fairly significant organization because Hawaii is the only state that retained some land use authority at the state level rather than having only cities and counties zone lands. So all land in Hawaii is in one of 4 districts: conservation, agricultural, rural, or urban district. And to develop housing, land has to be moved usually from the agricultural or the conservation district into the urban district. There's 9 commissioners who are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate to serve on this body. It's historically, like the book Land and Power in Hawaii by Cooper and Dawes, if you've read it, is basically a story about the LUC and how people used political influence to develop Hawaii. I've had the honor of, I'm in my 7th year of serving on the commission. And so the piece I wrote for Civil Beat that they were both kind enough to publish as well as kind enough to help Julia breathe through into being. It took a few months of expert editing and guidance and piercing questions to what exactly are you trying to say here? Really, but the inspiration came out of hearing, particularly every year before the legislative session, hey, you know, we just need to build more housing. We need to build 10,000 units of housing. We need to build 20,000 units of housing. We need to build 50,000 units of housing if we're possibly going to deal with our housing problem. And it took me a while, but after 7 years, I kind of got used to what the myths were and kind of what some of the truths were. So the 3 myths were that I think still you hear all the time is that we don't have enough housing in Hawaii. And if any of us who lived here through the pandemic knows, with all those vacant hotel units, at least for our houseless brothers and sisters, there was more than enough units available to house everybody who was in Hawaii, but other things that were blocking people from occupying those. The second is that if we simply build 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 units, we'll have enough housing for everybody. But the truth is that we have a continual influx of people from outside of Hawaii moving here and buying units, which is understandable because Hawaii is a lovely place to live, but they come in often with more money and more capital than us. So they outbid us at every price point, from rental housing at the lowest levels all the way to luxury homes. And the third myth is somehow that regulation is the great enemy of affordable housing. And if we simply got rid of the Historic Preservation Division or the LUC, that we would suddenly have enough housing. And so I kind of tried to deconstruct those, and I suggested a few things that we could directly do to address housing. One is hold developers to promises they've already made, because all of them, to get their entitlements, say, hey, we're going to do this many units. And many times those units are never built. The second, and I feel very strongly about, I am very frustrated that every conversation at the legislature about affordable housing should begin with the Department of Homeland Homelands, should begin with this promise that the people of Hawaii accepted as a condition for being a state. Part of the compact of statehood was, you will fulfill this act faithfully, and we haven't done it. We also need to redefine residency more aggressively. Right now, as long as you meet the income limits, all you have to have done is have a mailing address and paid taxes here once, and you get to qualify for affordable housing. So even if our leaders work for 10 years to develop a good affordable housing project, there's nothing guaranteeing really that the people who live here now have any right to move into that. And then I raised a couple of other points that the state and counties need to be better funded and more aggressive players in the housing market, that we need to really partner by choice with the nonprofit sector rather than the for-profit sector for building housing, that increasing density, and particularly density with an idea to a variety of housing choices is needed, because when the argument is made every year that we need tons of housing, we always get to see the Hawaiian version of the Cleavers trumped out, right? Mom, dad, and 2 kids, and not even like a queer couple, much less a multi-generational family or singles or elderly or people who just want to live together. And we need to have that as really part of our vision for who we are and how we want to live here.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Okay, I just want to share, we've had a comment come in from Ki'i. This is for you, Manu. She says, yes, auntie, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, speak it with a heart. So important to understand these foundational things. So,
Mahalo
and for
Kitty.
anybody else out there who wants to send in a comment or a question, please do, please share with us. And we think of this very much today as a discussion. So in that sense,
Nice.
Manu, I can ask a question, or is there anything in reaction to what Jonathan has just said that you would like to say?
A response, Julia, a total response. Now,
Okay.
Jonathan, you got to know, you guys, Ike Kupuna is about really respecting the things from people more experienced. And I do not sit in those meetings, Jonathan. So I value your insights. I value your experience. So um, everything you're discussing is about ho'opono, the ability to speak truth, especially in a setting where the modicum of truth is challenging because everyone comes from different cultural settings. What your solution sets are actually they're like medicine for the symptom that is poor housing. So what you're producing is medicine, and I just want to say that, Julia, is that his ideas are really about ho'opono, about Nohono Hawaii, and just it's time to infuse Hawaiian cultural insight and values and understanding into all facets of society. It's not like, we've been waiting around, we've been doing it in our own homes, we've been struggling, but it's time to debunk the nuclear family and the one single family housing, the kauhale. It's time for the kauhale to return because we can be more creative for how we maintain ourselves.
And what are like initial steps when you think about that, when you say it's time for the kauhale to return? How do we get there?
Are you kidding? It's already happening. We just have to bring it to, so for Brian's questions, cost of infrastructure, absolutely. But the way we define a problem defines the way we find a solution. So to define a problem, I mean, I'm a Big Island girl, you guys. Puna, hello, Puna. So let's talk about Puna for a minute. I know Jonathan knows about Puna. It's as big as Oahu, and Puna is known for its huge subdivisions with very little infrastructure, and the creativity of Puna, the ability to design your own homes out there. I learned from very early on in my mid-20s that you can be very safe. You can develop. I live in water catchment now on Oahu. We can develop different ways of infrastructure. We just don't have to have, huge cement. We just have to see things differently. If we want to have the Cleavers household, we're in the same situation and we're not improving. We've got to see our housing situation differently.
Okay, let's look at this question from Brian that came in. I'll just read it so that everyone who's watching can hear it. Cost of infrastructure to develop the land seems to be a big hurdle to get to the start line. Are there Native Hawaiian engineering and construction firms that can help with this initial work? And I don't know if that would be maybe specifically even to looking at DHHL lands, Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Is that something you want to speak to, Jonathan?
I'll jump in a little bit because I think that I don't want to deny, and I'm not an engineer, so yes, it costs money to put in water lines and sewer lines and roadways, but the choices that we make about the design of those, especially for raw land development, but even redevelopment, have a huge impact on the actual costs. So I mean, I think what there are Native Hawaiian firms and other firms who can help build infrastructure. I think even what Manu's piece really calls us to is to sort of really rethink from a foundational level. When we talk about infrastructure, even things that seem like, well, infrastructure is infrastructure, what are we really talking about, right? We need safe pathways to school, right? We don't necessarily need sidewalks of this given width designed to this depth with this much roadway in between them. We need water sufficient to let people bathe and cook in their homes, not necessarily sufficient for massive lawns. But we size our infrastructure, and our regulations that drive most of our infrastructure development are really, in many cases, regulations that were not developed in Hawaii. They were adapted slightly in Hawaii for regulations that were developed for Kansas and the continent, even to the point that in certain cases, like, you have to have roofs of a certain pitch, I believe, I've been told, so that snow can fall off of it. And it's like, well, I don't know that that's a concern for most of us in Hawaii. So my response to Brian's thoughtful question is, especially when we look at building in, the thoughts about what kind of infrastructure are needed start to narrow significantly. We do need increased sewer infrastructure. We do need increased spaces for the movement of goods and for buses, but not necessarily all the infrastructure that gets attributed to the cost of development.
Here's
I don't know. Oh, okay. I didn't know if Manu had anything.
Do you want to say any thoughts about that?
I just appreciate Jonathan's consistency about helping us rethink the even word of infrastructure. So there are lots of assumptions here and expectations that that really we need to back it up, and Jonathan just did. And so it goes deep. It goes deep. We're just not running to build units. A lot of Hawaiians, we don't want to live in a condominium. You know what I mean? So building more units up in the 16 stories is not where we want to live, many of us. So thank you for that, Jonathan.
Julia, if it's okay, actually, if I can just expand slightly, because my professional background is in water issues. And one of the key planning concepts that gets followed in Hawaii is water follows land, meaning if you zone land, it is automatically supposed to have that much water allocated to it, which is a very non-ike aina, ike kupuna approach to planning, right? Hawaiians wouldn't build a lo'ikalo at the top of a ridge where there is no water and then engineer a system to bring it up to necessarily, right? You would follow where water is. And even in something as fundamental as our water availability, we don't follow its pattern of natural abundance in terms of where we choose to live and where we encourage people to live, but rather we go with our economic preferences and then engineer nature to provide that, which then has an implication for instance, the cost of infrastructure.
Yep. Right on.
Absolutely. Right on. So here is a question from Kelly. Jonathan, do you think we really need to build more units, or can we find existing ones and make them available for residents as you just defined? Mahalo.
Thanks, Kelly. It's a good question. Probably a combination of the two is what I'm guessing. There's certainly, at least for the next few years, if not for many years to come, we're going to have a lot of empty hotel units. I just don't see this economy rebounding from the pandemic and people traveling at the level. And there might be areas where really the most economically efficient but best way to build more housing units for local people is to have some governmental and private investment in those and convert them. Are additional units needed? I'm going to pivot a little bit from the question to talk about one of the arguments that we always get is like, well, we need to build units because even our natural growth in population, we're going to need more housing units. And my response is always like, maybe, some of us do choose to move away. And, we bemoan it as the brain drain and we are sad when some of our loved ones move away. But I'm super glad some of us move away. I'm super glad Barack Obama did not stay in Hawaii. What would he be? Vice President of Bank of Hawaii, right? I'm super glad Bette Midler moved away. I'm super glad Ellison Onizuka moved away. I'm super glad some of our best and brightest actually went and shared what's best about Hawaii to the rest of the world. So we need to build more units for some of our local folks, but not necessarily just the simple math of we should build enough that 100% of us who want to stay are able to stay, because there's other solutions that are available to address that.
Nice.
And here's a follow-up from Brian. He says, just great feedback. Thanks. The alternative land development standards need to be presented. So really appreciating that. And maybe something that we could talk about a little more, connected with this idea of what exactly is infrastructure? What is its true purpose? Can we back it up, as you say, Manu, and really go deeper to think about it from a foundational standpoint? So can we do that now in terms of housing itself? When we think about the housing that we dream of, the housing that we most would like to live within, I would love it if each of you could speak to what that looks like for you.
Nice. Okay, absolutely. Julia, thank you for that question, because for me and for many people, housing is not about a house, it's about a home. And that home is about land, and that land is about relationality, and that relationality is about Aina Momona, and Aina Momona is about food, and food is about sharing, and sharing is about parties, and parties are about graduations, parties are about weddings, parties are about the ability to know where to get your pig, the ability to know where to gather your limu. There's all sorts of things that go into that. And we still have these practices in every island. Because Oahu is Oahu, there's still these practices. I moved here after 40 years from living in Hilo and Aotearoa. There are still these practices. But a home is about relationship with others and land. So this is the key idea of even looking at what Brian's asking to redevelop an alternative. I love the alternative. Alternative to Western norms is basically traditional ways of thinking. So back to a more commonsensical way of thinking about relationship with land and relationship with others, so that who knows, we could have a system where there could be 7 structures and 1 kitchen in the middle. There's so many different ways to look at this issue. So housing is about love of land and service to people. And that's what Aloha Aina teaches me. When you have the ability to have people have relationships with land, we heal. And when we heal, the party's on. So let us heal by allowing and encouraging. And that's what Hawaiian Homes land is all about. And yet you can't plant ulu trees. You can't. I mean, in a planter, they say, but you can't plant food trees. That is, anyways, enough said. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mahalo, Manu. Jonathan, do you want to take up that question?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And what I find myself thinking of is, we change over the course of our lives, and our housing needs change.
Yeah.
So it's popular to talk about what our dream home is, but hopefully if we're healthy and growing, our dreams change and our dream home changes. Right now I'm fortunate to live in by continental standards ridiculously overpriced but safe older home in a with a small yard for my son to play in. My dream home later is, I think, going to be much more densely populated, much closer to community, much more walkable. The kind of communities I would like to see built in Hawaii and rebuilt within our existing sort of urban footprint are ones like I've had an opportunity because of being on the LUC to tour some projects, and I went to one near Tacoma where it was really, by Hawaii standards, an incredibly dense community, but it was, every house had a front porch. So interaction among neighbors was strongly encouraged. For people who freak out about there being not enough street parking, they would have been horrified, because in what is in Hawaii standards a standard 2-way street, they allowed parking on both sides of the street. So cars, to get down your street, you had to like weave in and out of the parked cars where there was a little gap. But they did that on purpose. They did it for 2 reasons. One is to maximize the amount of land for housing. And second, cars go so slow It's safe for kids and seniors to cross the street because they're not whipping down the street, because the streets are actually designed not for the fast movement of cars, but for the safe movement of people. I'd like to see innovative, I'd like to have a home in an innovative designed community like that, that is really more designed for the collective good than necessarily the perceived potential resale value of the unit.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting, even when you say dream home, I don't think that was the way I asked the question, but that's, but that's dream home. And when I heard you say that, I was like, oh, no, wait, that's not what I meant. Because I think that that phrase dream home evokes such a sense of money, house as commodity. Oh, what's the dream home? Well, it's got, whatever, 4 bathrooms and marble countertops. And so more, it's like, what is the home of your heart, of your soul? And so I love that you mentioned innovative communities, because that was actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, are there models that you have seen, things that you feel would work, but that actually already exist and are working? And so one of the questions that so you mentioned this one near Tacoma, and I wondered, Manu, I know that you lived for quite some time in Aotearoa. And could you tell us a little bit about what your experience is? What did you see there? What's it like with housing? That's another part of Polynesia. And
so, it's all over the market. But what I did appreciate is they had great bathrooms, public bathrooms. My twin sister Moana loved it. I mean, beautiful, beautiful public bathrooms for everybody. And they had county and state housing that needed winterizing. It's a different issue over there, but the socialized system of care in Aotearoa is different. We are in a state of, we're in the fracas right now. But what I noticed is that we can learn from a system of people, legislated to take care of people. You know what I mean? We have the option here, and we're not choosing the option. And this is why Jonathan's ideas are clearly they give us handles. And this is what I learned in Aotearoa too. I worked at the Maori University there, and if we think there's no alternative or no difference to our Western systems of learning, we are grossly uneducated. And the same thing with here. I did not study housing in Aotearoa. I studied transformative higher education. And so that's why I know we can do things differently, because other people around the world do their higher education. Can you imagine a transformative land management major? You know what I mean? Or, you know what I mean? Come on. I mean, just think of it, Julia and Jonathan. It does start with creative thinkers that are shaped by cultural values, because indigeneity is a synonym for continuity. And what we have here is a youthful cultural component trying to, in an island setting, you cannot have this kind of thinking, the continental thinking that Jonathan is speaking of, that gets placed in Hawaii. We are island thinkers and island doers. So sorry about that.
No. Here's another question connected with that. Jonathan, you wrote in your piece about holding developers accountable. So that's one piece of it. But it feels almost like, from the things that I'm hearing, it's holding developers accountable, yes, but it's also changing who the developers even are. So how do you create this kind of new world in which people who would be developing the sorts of communities and housing that we're talking about are empowered to actually do that?
These are not simple talk show questions, Julia.
Yeah.
These are really good.
It does say ideas right behind you.
Yeah. No, sorry, there we go. I think if I heard Manu correctly, part of it is starting at the university, the curriculum that we teach. Are we are we seeing our mission at the university to bring up new local developers as part of it? And developing for Hawaii. Part of the state government and the county governments actually do invest a tremendous amount in housing right now. Where do those dollars go? Do they go to the same development entities all the time, or is there some level of creativity and experimentation given to trying to broaden and grow the development community to have a diversity of developers and a diversity of thinking about development? Those are a couple ways that might address your question. If I got to what you were trying to get at, Julia.
Yeah, absolutely. Manu, you want to?
Huge question, Julia. You know, I see a question from Pohai. How about real people without housing be a part of the discussion? Pohai, thank you for that. I just want to I want to tell you that I know many people in some parts of my ohana are without housing, and so this is part of our solution set, is to simply be to continue this discussion so that broader policies and broader ideas. People like me never get into civil beat because I'm a philosopher practitioner. I'm a teacher at a university, so and I'm a renter. I'm forever going to rent here on Oahu, and so my thinking is really kind of meant to irritate or to water or to be transformative, but we've got to have discussions with everybody. So this is why they asked me, somebody who does have housing, although it's renting. I'm a renter for the rest of my life here on Oahu, because I believe that we do need to develop different systems, but they must have aloha at the core and aloha aina. And so I'm going to say it again and again and again. This will change even our economies of tourism, conscious traveling. People want to consciously travel and help in situations more. This will change how we view food. Most of us don't even know how to grow food, let alone rejuvenate soil. So these are issues that I believe can be placed at the heart of our housing situation, because they're at the heart of the disease of this youthful society. So absolutely, and we did the movie with two of my friends who are homeless. So Civil Beat did, not Civil Beat, somebody did it, and so Civil Beat did the article. So please view that movie, because there's choke ideas from every sector of society, and Jonathan and I represent just a small portion of it.
And just to be quick, so the movie that you're talking about, Manu, I think it's the piece that Abby Seitz and Williamson Chang did.
Yes,
and Williamson Chang did a piece on housing in the Civil Beat Ideas section that ran last Friday. And at the end of Williamson and Abby's piece is a link to that film to look at Native housing specifically from the Native Hawaiian perspective. But I'd love to share a comment that I think from Hong that circles around to Pohai's question, because I do think Pohai exactly. And when this question of what about the people who are just out there right now that need somewhere to live, need somewhere to sleep. And this is something that Manu and Jonathan and I were talking about yesterday. So here's a comment from Hong. There are senior communities coming up in other states where seniors buy in and live in a large community house with a central kitchen, dining, and social areas, but separate living and sleeping units. And so that goes again to that idea of kauhale, of bringing a lot of people together, and to your idea, Jonathan, of density and changing the density. And I guess the question is it does go back to who are the developers and why is something being developed? Much of what is being developed at its core is being developed to make somebody money, right? So, how do you create, let's say, a shared housing system like that could maybe provide housing for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 people with shared facilities that would then have a lower per person cost, that would then be more affordable, that would then be more accessible. But who's going to take the lead on something like that to actually create it?
The folks at Pu'uhonoa Owaianai are taking their own lead, which might speak partially to both Hong's point and Pohai's point. And it'd be interesting if you had Twinkle Borge on here, who has been one of the leaders in that community. And they've really, right, they've actually, the homeless community around the Waianae Boat Harbor raised, I think, over $1 million to buy their own parcel of land where they're planning to build their kauhale, and they're in the process of trying to build that. And they're in the process of trying to design that. So I've lost my train of thought a little bit in response to your question, but it's one of the things in response to Pohai's point that I think, yeah, I'm just one person with some set of thoughts. There's a lot of interesting ideas out there and creativity coming from people who are actually houseless now. And there are models that are being pursued in Hawaii. What's interesting I've seen about the pursuit of those models is, with the help of an architectural firm, there was like a brief rendering that, like, based on that community's ideas that they did. And then a couple of political leaders said, hey, well, this is what we just need to do a lot of these, missing the community that rendering was attached to and the ideas and relationships that came up with it. So I think that's what, when I read Manu's piece, and there's such depth to it, but when there's concepts of Kauhale and Kaiaulu in her work that she's talking about, that's what, the more that these new forms of housing can come up really from community rather than simply being offered on a marketplace, the better chance we're going to have of getting to the kind of housing that will really serve us well.
Yeah, anti-twinkles, those guys, that really sets a really great kind of that's a kauhale. And that there's governance, there's rules, people know each other's names, there's an understanding, a shared understanding. That is a pu'ohonua. So without, making it a nostalgic kind of thing, we're doing it backwards. We're building buildings and shoving people in instead of building communities and asking, how do you want to develop? So that right there is a transformative idea, Jonathan. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then also taking, that to me ties to so many of the principles that you brought forth, Manu. But what I'm thinking of specifically at the moment is ikeaina, that then if the land on which this happens is planted with the plants, the trees that offer their own wisdom to the people who are living there, so that there is a real sense of a community that is not a solely human community, but that really, right, because then it's so much about the trees and the relationship with the, the food sources, but also going back to that idea of what really is a home, what makes a home, the animals, the trees, all the beings around.
So Julia's touching on an amazing, profound idea that our word for trees is kumu. So when we have the ability to plant trees, to have a relationship with trees again, and we're talking any kind trees, kukui, lama, niu, ulu, mango. So once you just shove people into, so the ability to learn from land is actually key. And therefore, and this is the hard thing. We have creative people in our positions, but we need farmers to live on land. Let us live on our land, and let us live, and let us live creatively on lands. We can't farm. They were giving us land 25 miles away in Laupahoehoe, but who can drive 25 miles and back just to do land? You've got to allow for different forms of, and the policing too, because people will take advantage of that for sure. But we do need to have our farmers live on their Aino Momona. Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. And our people that want to live near trees, the capacity to have trees, not just walls, not just wall, anyways. Yeah, Ike Aina must have a relationship with trees and animals. We must.
If I can, it sparks for me, and maybe this is just because I don't have a good understanding of the etymology, but I always get a slight shiver when people hold a groundbreaking to start a project. It's like, ooh,
And you,
is that what we start with? Right? It's not,
yeah.
right? It's not a kanu, right? We're not planting,
Yeah.
we're not growing, we're
We're
breaking
pouring
in our
cement.
language.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
so what do
Good
you
one,
get if you've
Jonathan.
broken the ground and then you put something there, right? How can we, even in that sort of, I know this sounds a little, but how can we talk about how we plant communities and plant
Nice.
people into land rather than we hold a groundbreaking ceremony?
And then pour cement on it.
Yeah.
Nice. You can start there. There we go.
Here is a question from Joe. He says, Aloha, Jonathan. In your article, you wrote that the LUC has approved every affordable housing project brought to it under the accelerated 201H affordable housing timelines. And then his question is, are you saying that the LUC has not voted against any 201H project?
So I saw that question in the chat. I got a little nervous for a couple of reasons. First of all, I have not been on the Land Use Commission the entirety of the time that 201H process has been in place. My statement in the article, I talked with the LUC staff to confirm my understanding that we have indeed approved every fast track 201H project that's come before us. And they confirmed that that was the case. I know I've been part of some of them, including a 100% affordable housing project being built in Hanapipe by Kauai County. Mayor Carvalho was the lead in that. There have been some controversial 201H projects at the county level that have not come in front of the LUC, which have been voted down because, for instance, I'm familiar with some on Maui, the requirement is that 51% of the units be affordable under at least Maui County rules. And there was some concern that the balancing was actually not sufficient to address all the impacts in the project. But those were not at least ones that I was personally involved with doing, and I'm more than happy to follow up with the question if I've missed part of Joe's understanding or intention with the question. So.
You know, maybe connected with that, Jonathan, if you know, I'm curious how many of those projects, how many projects are we talking about? How many housing units are we talking about?
For under 201H?
Yeah, under 201H.
I don't have that at the top of my head. I will say most of the projects that have come before us have not been 201H projects. 201H projects do require, in return for the fast track, some very, very high affordability requirements. And so many developers have not chosen to pursue that process, but rather go through the regular district boundary amendment process to move land from agriculture or conservation into the urban district for housing. So I'd say the vast majority of projects have not availed themselves of that process.
So that could be maybe, you know, we have, we've been going for 48 minutes, so we probably have another maybe 15 minutes or so. So I want to use our time as well as possible, but maybe you could just share with us a little bit about, given those 7 years on the LUC, if the vast majority of projects are not using 201H, if you were going to generalize, what sorts of projects do come before the Land Use Commission in terms of housing development?
I'm going to sort of answer the question, and you can push me hard if I'm not answering it the right way. But I'll talk about it in terms of a couple LUC examples. And also before I was on the LUC, I spent 3 years on the Oahu Island Burial Council as one of the 2 Konamoku representatives. I worked next to Hina as the other Konamoku representative. And the big distinction in projects that come before the LUC and that came before the Burial Council weren't actually even in were they affordable or non-affordable, were they for-profit or not-for-profit. The big distinguishing factor for me has been to see, were the proponents of the project willing to sit down and talk with known stakeholders at depth for a long time before breaking ground? Or were they coming in to just do the minimum what they believed the law required? And so one of the best projects that I enjoyed voting for in favor of in Maui, Waikapu Country Town is one of the biggest. It's going to be like 3,000 units of new housing in central Maui. But that developer, Mike Atherton, who lives on Maui, spent a decade talking story with folks before ever coming in front of the LUC and saying, he said, hey, what do you think about this idea first? And everybody's like, dude, no way. They said, but change this, change that. By the time he came to us, the first testifier in favor of his project was the local ILWU. The next testifier was the Maui Tomorrow Foundation. The next testifier was the Hotel and Visitor Lobbying Association. The next testifier was the Sierra Club Maui chapter. And I had a new member of the commission next to me and they're like, is it always like this? I'm like, no, 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 it's not always like this. But he had really worked with community. And so the projects that help us develop sustainably and really develop the housing for local people really are distinguished more by the approach that they take to community than anything else.
Nice, nice. And there it is, Julia. Nohona Hawaii. There it is. There it is. So Jonathan's solution sets are all about Nohona Hawaii, about you know, being real about how we develop. Are we developed in our relationship with the community? Or are we just wanting to make money? You know, great.
Yeah, yeah, it's true the way it comes back again and again, Manu, to the foundational pieces that you wrote. I want to share a comment from Heather. She wrote, Eola, trees make a home, trees make it home. And then thank you, mahalo, Heather, for sending that in. And here's a question from Thomas. He asks, localizing production of housing construction materials, question mark, 3D housing construction, question mark. So really that's getting at a couple of specific ideas that get to innovation in the way things are done, and then also kind of not, you know, not having to always bring in things from outside, that not everything maybe has to come from Home Depot or Lowe's. You know, what do we do to make things come up much more from the local creativity, the local ingenuity.
Albezius. So there, you know, we've got an Albezius timber industry here, and this will help. So Albezius, that's been shown. Matthew Lynch of, you know, the sustainable, you know, thing that they did at Manoa. Check that out. I mean, so we do have it here. Thomas, thank you for that. 3D housing, absolutely yes. There are many people that want us to enter the 21st century. And we can actually do it in a fulgent and coherent way by addressing affordability, sustainability, by bringing out invasives, clearing out places for food. We could do it systematically and clearly, but we have to have creative thinkers that understand that Albezius and other invasive trees are killing many of our places, and yet they're great. It's great lumber. So, you know, how can we do without polluting our stream sources, and how can we make because they have that in Aotearoa. They do have, I was very impressed that they had their own timber industry. Of course, it's huge, but you know, all their wood is absolutely made there. So if we could actually think of that and use Albezius and other woods, but Albezius is everywhere, and very, very hard. I was very impressed with how hard the Albezius was. Right, Heather? Right. Come on.
I was thinking of the Albezia demonstration project at UH Manoa that's right along University Avenue as well.
That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one, Jonathan.
So I think, and this is, it's at the edge of my expertise. I agree. It would be great on a whole bunch of levels for housing to be built more with locally sourced materials. But I don't know fully what all the barriers are to that. Both the legal and regulatory barriers, the perhaps taxation barriers, as well as the what I see kind of pervasive throughout our approach to housing, the mental barriers, the barriers in here that stop us from thinking about these kinds of solutions. So.
Just so you know, everybody, Uncle Francis and Nancy, they've made a Hawaiian hale. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, that there is, you can live in one, and they're beautiful to live in. We teach out of them at UH West Oahu, and there are so many options. We did try to build a bamboo house over in Punahou. So bamboo is the fastest growing grass in the world. There are ways and creativity that we haven't even touched yet. So yes, the question is yes, let's try it.
Yeah, I just want to share the follow-up from Thomas Re Albizia. He says, I agree, you could kill two birds with one stone. One, eliminate invasive species, and two, reduce import dependency and increase affordability with local sources.
Maybe we can house two birds with one tree rather than kill two with one stone.
It's really nice. And I agree with you, Manu, about the wood in Aotearoa. The most amazing wood that's being used for building down there. I saw incredible architecture with local woods there.
Yeah. I see the question from Henry.
Do landlords have excessive power to remove renters?
I would say probably there's not a landlord in Hawaii right now who would say yes because of the eviction moratorium. So I have no doubt that there's some landlords who are thinking like, no, I don't have nearly enough power. I would break it down a little bit, Henry, and say landlords is not a monolith. Landlords can be Tutu, who's alone in her house now, but who has a little rental unit, and that's what's allowing her to stay there, to people who own dozens or hundreds of units. I don't know that the regulatory scheme should be or is equal for either of those entities. So maybe you want to say a little bit more about what specifically you're trying to get at. I think it's hard if you're, especially if it's an owner occupied and you're renting it out, you probably want to have some say over, could you ask somebody to leave if they're not good for your health or safety or mental well-being. But if it's a commercial unit, there obviously need to be some good protectors for renters.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, we are almost at the top of the hour now. And I feel like I would love to, in the spirit of this just being a discussion, to ask each of you for just closing thoughts. Are there things that we haven't touched on that you think it's important for us to say, for the viewers to hear?
I want to have Manu have the last word because it'll be the best word. So I'm going to go first. And I'm going to though touch on something that you included the word ainamomona, or abundance, and maybe people don't all know who are listening the idea of the concept of momona, of plumpness, of abundance, the richness of Hawaii and the richness of our land. For me, amidst our scarcity mentality, there's more than enough that we have to take care of everybody who's here. That's for me one of the more fundamental points. And so that I actually have a tremendous amount of hope that if we can get through some of the barriers here and some of the barriers between us, we can actually craft really satisfying and great and amazing solutions for our communities, with our communities, in our communities, that will not solve everything all at once, but will make meaningful step-by-step progress to, growing the kind of Hawaii and the kind of housing that we want to live in.
Kukulu o puakai, ma alihilani kai, kulalani ka hiko kai, elo o lalo I ka vai o kulani hako I. Kulu mai la ua, haveve mai la ua, loku mai la ua, e ola ko lalo nei. I kupua mu o mai la, mu o a laula mai la, lau a lala mai la, lala kumu mai la, kumu apa aino ole. Uaikea. We could do it. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Have faith, everyone. Be kind. This is the aloha. We have aloha. Believe that. And remember what Jonathan taught us, the way we define a problem determines the way we find a solution. So let's redefine this problem because we live in the land of aloha. We can do this. We can do this. Amama wono, amene. Mahalo. Thank you.
Mahalo.
I hesitate to speak after that, but just to say that the deepest gratitude to you both for being here today. And Mano, you wrote of Awamo Kuleana, individual excellence leading to collective transformation. And thank you both for the excellence you shared with us today, moving towards that transformation. Thank you to all the viewers who are here with us today. And we will be back next week at 2 p.m. And mahalo.
Aloha.
Be well.
Aloha, hui ho, everyone.
We hope.
Hui ho.